Hello and welcome to the EPG Pathshala on criminal psychology, and this module is in the area of moral psychology. Module 4 is going to be talking about virtues and character. My name is Dr. Gayatri Arun Kumar and I am with the Department of Psychology at the Indraprastha College for Women, Delhi University. Virtues and character module 4. We begin with an introduction. Then we talk about virtue ethics, then looking at the area of moral virtues and research. Then we explore the role of character and virtues in moral psychology, looking at two perspectives, the philosophical and the psychological perspective. The learning objectives of this module 4 is 1. To understand the concept of virtues and ethics in moral psychology. 2. To get a perspective of the role of character in moral psychology. The key words to note are virtue, ethics, character, interactionistic view. I now begin with an introduction to the topic. Introduction. One of the central questions in moral psychology is whether moral judgments and actions derive from a person's rational or emotional processes. Another dimension to this question is the extent to which moral actions derive from a person's character traits or their situations. For instance, if both Jay and Karthik come across a car accident with victims in need of help, what would best explain why Jay stops himself while Karthik walks past? Is that Jay has traits of compassion or courage, while Karthik is selfish or cowardly? One tradition that suggests that such character traits explain moral behavior is the tradition of virtue ethics. Virtue ethics says that moral actions derive from the virtues. A person's disposition to reason and act consistently and appropriately, to reason and act consistently and appropriately in response to situations calling for moral behavior. The next subtopic is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is a family of views that focuses less on what it is right to do and more on what sort of person is it good to be. A good person is someone with many virtues like compassion, courage, honesty, trustworthiness, and few vices: selfishness, laziness, unfairness, rashness. Most of the ancient Greek philosophers were virtue ethicists of one kind or the other. Plato emphasized the virtues of courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice. Aristotle thought that every virtue was a middle state between two vices. For instance, courage is a middle state or mean between two vices of rashness and cowardice. Plato and Aristotle laid the foundation for a virtue theoretic account of characteristic traits upon which later philosophers built their work on. Whether virtue ethics offers a realistic moral psychology, however, is largely an empirical issue. And some have argued that the evidence does not support this purported advantage of virtue ethics over its competitors, because recent research in social psychological research suggests that human behavior, including moral behavior, is caused primarily by situational factors rather than robust character traits. This line of research suggests, for instance, that the best explanation for Jay's altruistic or helping behavior and Karthik's seemingly callous, selfish behavior may be that when Jay witnessed the accident, he was the only person present, whereas when Karthik walked by, there were several other inactive bystanders. So often there was a diffusion of responsibility in the case of Karthik. Numerous experiments, for example, the classic one by Latani and Darley, have suggested that these sort of situational variables, like the presence of bystanders, may account for our behavior more than the differences in people's personality or character. The central questions that we should note are: what are character traits? What are virtues? How stable are character traits across various situations? And how it unifies the different virtues, or how unified are the other virtues? How do people develop the character traits and virtues? What factors led people to act out of character? Plato and Aristotle developed influential accounts of the virtues of courage, justice, self-control and wisdom, and argued that in the virtuous person, these character traits are both robust across various situations and interrelated among each other. Plato and Aristotle laid the foundation for a virtue theoretic account of characteristic traits upon which the later philosophers worked. In the 20th century, however, an apparent empirical challenge to this picture emerged. Stanley Milgram's experiment is just one of the many situationist tradition of social psychology, suggesting that people's behavior is better explained by features of their external environment, including their social situation, rather than by internal characteristics. Psychologists Lee Ross and Richard Nisbet offer an overview of situationism, arguing that consistency of behavior has more to do with consistency in people's environment than consistency in personality traits. It's environment winning over traits. Furthermore, our ordinary psychological explanations are based on overemphasizing character traits and underemphasizing situational variables. Among numerous studies supporting this theory, this selection includes a discussion of experiments on the bystander intervention effect given by Latane and Darley, which have shown that whether people help someone in need depends largely on the presence or absence of bystanders, as suggested in the example of Jay and Karthik above, as well as the Good Samaritan study, where we learned that whether people help depends largely on whether they are in a hurry or not. These situational effects appear to make a larger difference to one's behavior than any measured character traits. Philosopher John Doris brings this situationist research to bear on questions about moral theory. Notably, the challenge it poses to the conception of character required by virtue ethics. Doris argues that if virtue ethics suggests that people should guide their behavior in various situations by contemplating what the rare virtuous person would do, then it may be less effective than the guidance offered by a conception of character that recognizes for instability of character. Instability of character and the strength of situational influences on behavior. Reflection on the situationistic conception of moral psychology, Doris argues, provides a type of self-knowledge that would foster ethical behavior more effectively than virtue ethics. A characterological moral thought which may have substantial pitfalls insofar as it may foster a dangerous neglect of our situational influences. Another philosopher, Rachna Kamtekar, argues that virtue ethics has the resources to deal with the challenge posed by situationist research. This is because, she argues, the conception of character traits actually employed by virtue ethics is simply the one that situationism calls into question. Virtue begins with a habituation, but it is eventually based on effectual, practical reasoning. And Kamtekar suggests that such effectual, practical reasoning can be usefully informed by experimental or empirical psychology. Virtues may be relatively rare and difficult to exercise, as they require overcoming various cognitive limitations. Kamtekar suggests that the viability of virtue ethics depends more on our abilities to be effective, practical reasoners than on the consistency of character traits as they are measured in social psychology. Another researcher, Merritt, suggests that the main lesson of the situationist research is that behavior is generated largely by social relationships and settings, rather than robust character traits that operate independently of these external social contributions. The emphasis here is on establishing social settings likely to secure human cooperation and basic goods, rather than establishing, perhaps, unrealistic capacities to individuals to behave virtuously regardless of their situation. Moral virtues and research is the next topic. Morality as virtue suggests that the morality of a person depends on the traits and temperaments that he or she possesses and values. Piaget and Kohlberg, both famous psychologists, develop stages of development to understand the timing and the meaning of decisions. Another group of researchers, Lapsley and Narvaez, 2004, in a paper, A Social Cognitive Approach to Moral Personality, outline how social cognition explains aspects of moral functioning that our other theories alone could not cover. The social cognitive approach to personality has 6 critical resources of moral personality: cognition, self-processes, affective elements of personality, changing social context, lawful situational variability, and the integration of other literature. Lapsley and Narvaez suggest that our moral values and actions stem from more than our virtues and are more so controlled by a set of schemas, knowledge structures of how we organize stimulus in the social world, cognitive structures that organize related concepts and integrate past events that we have created in our minds. They claim that schemas are fundamental to our very ability to notice dilemmas as we appraise the moral landscape. As people add to their schemas through knowledge and experience, they deliberately shape their view of morality. This idea fits in with Kohlberg's idea that moral reasoning is what governs action. Although Kohlberg believes in virtues as an aspect of morality, Kohlberg stresses more on a justice reasoning approach to generate a consensus about moral developmental dilemmas. Kohlberg also argues that virtues are not the same among different cultures. Different societies have different moral virtues by which they live. Lapsley and Narvaez suggest that over time we become moral experts. In gaining this moral expertise, we align our goals to our moral self, seek out and gain new knowledge of what it is to be moral, and develop highly practiced behavioral routines and acts, all for the goal of acting out what it means to be a moral person. Essentially, we are achieving a social cognitive account of personality advocated by Servone and Shoda in 1999, referred to as a personality coherence. This phenomenological sense of self-coherence that orders our goals, preferences and values and gives meaning to personal striving and motivated behavior allows us to become moral experts because, according to the social cognitive approach, personality processes do not function independently but are instead organized into a coherent system shaped by our personal experience and social contexts. The next subtopic is going to be on the role of character and virtue in moral psychology. This will have 2 perspectives, the philosophical perspective followed by the psychological perspective. I now begin with the philosophical perspective. Character plays an important role in the virtue ethical framework for moral psychology. Prominent normative philosophical theories are utilitarian ethics and Kantian ethics. Utilitarian ethics holds that what makes the state of affairs good has nothing to do with the character of the people involved, and what makes an action right has nothing to do with whether the person who committed the act was virtuous, vicious, or neither. Character, they feel, will be cultivated and acted upon from various utility promoting character traits, which would then be counted as virtues. On the contrary, Kantian ethics hold that what makes an action right depends solely on the agent's intention in the action. Those traits, characteristics that distinguishes people would count as Kantian virtues. An important notion here is that virtue acquisition takes time, and the reason that to have a virtuous character takes continuous practice and habituation. Inputs from developmental psychology focus on the parenting and peer influence, which initiate the process of cultivation and monitoring the development of character long before and even after people have a chance to engage in self-cultivation or self-improvement or self-monitoring. Theorists of virtue typically hold that good character is most easily cultivated in an appropriate social context. It is easier to be and become virtuous among other people who are similarly virtuous. We now come to the last part, which is the psychological perspective. The psychological perspective. This leads us to an ongoing debate in psychology, the person versus situation debate. According to the person perspective, the sole driver of behavior is personality. The reasons why a person behaves as he or she does is because of the traits present, such as is she an introvert, an extrovert, neurotic or emotionally resilient, open to new experiences or cautious, conscientious or careless, agreeable or detached. According to the situation perspective, the sole driver of behavior is the situation, not personality. The reason why a person behaves as he or she does is because of the constraints of the situation. For example, what were the possibilities for action the situation afforded, whether anyone else was watching, and so on. A more balanced and realistic view is the interactionistic view. It posits that both personality and situation drive behavior. Character, as in any other behavior, is also moderated by a combination of personality and the situation. In the same way that bodily functions and gut bacteria are in constant interaction, so are personality and situation in constant interaction mode, developing the character and virtues of individuals. Feedback loops connect an individual's character in a way that the initial influence of personality changes the situation, and then the modified situation influences the individual's personality. To some, both personality and situational context contribute to the explanation and prediction of behavior, including moral behavior. Thank you.